Hello there, YouTube. So I promise that it's my intention is not to make daily videos, but as this whole situation has been steadily changing, almost seemingly hourly, the last couple of days since AEW All Out, the media scrum with CM Punk, and then obviously now more information has come out with kind of the aftermath of the scrum. I thought I would do one more video here before we get to Wednesday. So I won't touch on this again for another video until we get to Wednesday, where obviously we're all looking to see what the fallout is from all of this. So specifically for this video, I just want to touch on the fallout from the immediate AEW scrum. In the previous episode, I was focusing on the scrum itself, what CM Punk said, even though I didn't outline every single detail of it, because obviously at this point there's plenty of places where you can get that information. But I did want to talk about whether I felt this was falling under the category of a work, or where this was a situation where Punk was kind of just saying what he wanted to say because he just kind of doesn't care. And he felt justified in just taking whatever pot shots he felt he wanted to take. Now, since then, we've gotten a little bit more information, a little bit more background. However, what makes things a little bit complicated is that right now everything is a lot of conjecture, a lot of information going on in the back. But some reliable sources are getting more and more information, more intel. I'm going to outline some of that for you right now. And then at the same time, I was already in the camp from the last video, as I mentioned. I'm in the camp of this would not make a lot of sense if you were going to do this as an elaborate storyline. All of this is not to say that you could not potentially turn it into a storyline, but now you are very much walking a very dangerous tightrope. And kind of what I alluded to in the last episode, Tony Khan is courting danger. He has been courting danger, and and that has not changed. What he does next is going to be absolutely critical, kind of to where the company is going to go going forward, because the way you treat this is what everybody's going to be keeping an eye out on. It's already happened. What has happened has now happened. But at the same time, what you do now, starting on Wednesday, or any announcements you put out on Tuesday here as I'm recording this, that is going to be what people are going to pay attention to going forward. And the reason why I say that I'm pretty much now in the camp of this happening, more or less, obviously with some details that we don't fully know, more or less happening similar to what's being reported, is that there's almost no way to make this into a win for yourself. Doesn't mean you can't turn a storyline out of it, but you're basically doing damage control. Even a great storyline coming out of it will be damage control. You will get attention. There is almost no doubt in my mind that you will get a lot of eyeballs on the Wednesday show compared to normal and maybe get a little bit of a rating spike. But that's going to be temporary, because how you proceed from here is going to be what's going to either keep people around to kind of, with some intrigue, or is going to draw people away because they're going to realize that you have in fact lost control of the situation, and it's not going to lead to something satisfying creatively that people are able to sink their teeth into and tune in the following week for and the weeks after that. And it's a shame because there's some potentially big shows on the horizon with the Arthur Ashe Stadium show and other potential shows down the road here. And again, a storyline that on paper was already set up to be very interesting and intriguing and kind of blur that line anyway. And then we got all this other stuff going on that has nothing to do with MJF. So it's kind of a weird situation all around. Okay, so I'm showing you kind of right now as I'm talking, basically what just happens if you go search YouTube right now with AEW Brawl, because already you can see that a lot of these videos have already come out. Like, Cultaholic has a pretty good viewership, but in 18 hours, 105,000 views are pretty impressive. And obviously, this is a great thumbnail, and you're going to see a lot of stuff like Nick Jackson knocked out an AEW Backstage Brawl, Malachi Black down. So there's a lot of intrigue in AEW, and right now, not a lot of it is very good. Okay, so let's talk about the fallout of the CM Punk promo. The CM Punk scrum, I should say. I want to call it a promo, but in reality, it was from the scrum. Okay, so after he kind of went in and it went after Colt Cabana, went after the Young Bucks, went after Kenny Omega, the EVPs, and did all that, the reports started coming in that in addition to that, after that scrum and after that whole situation, that somebody from security went out and basically was dealing with some kind of an altercation. And obviously an altercation, more details start coming in, and basically it was some combination of a fight between Ace Steel, CM Punk, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega. So that's what the report has been saying. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of information from Fightful. PW Insider reported that after the scrum, CM Punk returned to the locker room where the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega confronted him. Again, this is all alleged, so we're just going to keep that, take that with a grain of salt, but that's what a lot of the reporting is coming back from. We confirm that Punk and the Young Bucks had a physical altercation, but we haven't heard the same for Omega. Instead, Omega and Ace Steel were said to have had one. Now, that part is kind of fun and kind of interesting, weird, but now this one here is probably one of the most serious elements of this report. We're told that Ace Steel cracked Nick Jackson with a chair, and another person thinks he's lucky to not be in jail. So, a couple of different things here. And the story of Nick Jackson have a black eye came from Steel throwing a chair at him. There's a lot of things here. Security was called, and there were many people trying to break everything up. One person outright said the situation of them trying to save lives. An incredible amount of heat on Ace Steel after the situation. One person saying they weren't sure what happened. but couldn't have possibly escalated to hitting someone with a chair. Regardless, there's a lot of questions now as far as where this is going to go going forward. With professional wrestling, you always have to take everything with a grain of salt because, again, everybody likes to blur the lines, and AEW seemingly has taken to a particular liking to enjoying that reality based slash we don't seem to always have control of the situation, and we want to present ourselves that way kind of booking. Again, where you had the MJF, going off on Tony Khan before he came back at All Out, that was, a situation that was kind of left open. But at the same time, it's one of those things where, kind of in the vein of what we talked about, it did leave some intrigue, but again, that doesn't stick for very long. And then now the CM Punk situation, leading into this, there was already a bit of a CM Punk situation because you had that very strange ending to the Moxley and CM Punk, title unification match that then led into the pay-per-view, that then led into Punk winning, that then right after that, Punk followed it up with this media scrum situation, and now potentially a backstage fight. Again, if we take everything with a grain of salt, we still find ourselves with this same situation that it's like, okay, look, you can pick your poison here. There's a lot of moving parts here to try to do this big elaborate story. That isn't to say they couldn't turn it into one and really work their way around it, work some magic to make it happen. But if even a fraction of this is true, and Ace Steel did in fact attack one of the Young Bucks with a chair, you basically can't come back from that. But then you've got yourself a bit of a problem because Ace Steel is a good buddy of CM Punk. So then if they decided to discipline Ace Steel by either suspending him, fining him, or most likely firing him, because that would certainly be a fireable offense, if nothing, at the bare minimum, it's one of those things like, okay, so then what happens with your relationship with CM Punk going forward? Do you get rid of both of them? Do the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega walk as a result of that? That was one of the kind of stories that were circulating around, that, they had threatened to walk as a result of dissatisfaction with what happened there. So you find yourself in this weird situation where you got potentially these two camps. But no, I don't think anybody's blameless in this because we still don't have, because of the nature of this type of business, you never really know what people's relationships are inside of it. They do have to work with each other to a certain degree, but it doesn't mean everybody gets along. And it's one of those things where the whole thing with the Elite, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, they have stayed relatively tight knit. The whole thing when Cody Rhodes went away, there was a whole situation there with that where it may not have been a money issue. It may have been a personality clashing issue. I talked about that a little bit on the podcast at the time where I said, look, from a creative standpoint, I'm not really bothered by it. Cody Rhodes stuff was really wearing thin with me. And I'm not paying attention to what WWE is doing, so I didn't really care that he went over there and did that with very similar presentation. And if it works for him, it works for him. That's great. Obviously, he got injured, so he'll be back at some point, and then most likely will continue from where he left off and build on the storyline he was doing. But was there a personal issue that also kind of led him away? Was it an issue with Tim and Tony Khan? Was it an issue with him, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega? Is that relationship okay? Do they similarly have issues with relationships with other folks in the back? Or is CM Punk just being a big jerk? And there's a possibility that there's a little bit of truth to all those elements of it. It could be that Punk is being a bit of a jerk and having his own vision of where he thinks he should be going, what he should be doing, and where his role is. And then obviously Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, they have their vision of it, given that they were there at the start of the company and were part of the impetus that led to the starting of the company. CM Punk's Tony Khan's desire to kind of be, yes, the boss, yes, the booker, but also kind of on friendly terms with a lot of his talent, has also caused him some problems in the past. Because I've talked about the whole thing when there was the blow up with Big Swole. Again, as a talent, I had very little interest in what Big Swole was doing, but that didn't mean that a lot of her critiques at the time when she left on the way out were not necessarily unfounded. There was an element of structure, there was an element of that. But one of the elements that I mentioned on the podcast at the time was that she seemed to have almost this hurt reaction to it because she felt that she had a certain relationship with Tony Khan, but in reality didn't have that type of relationship. And this is where I kind of could get concerned, speaking in general terms here. I get concerned that part of this situation may have unfolded because of Tony Khan's desire to try to be like the boss, but he kind of wants to be like the cool boss. He wants to be the boss that is like, yeah, but it's like, I'm on good terms with folks. And it's like, oh no, I'm your friend. And it's this dangerous combination where it's like, yeah, you're the boss though. You're still the boss. There's this thing. Now, this whole situation beyond that is the question. It's like, yeah, you're the boss, but are you now willing to put your foot down? Because one of the reports that we had over the last couple of weeks is that Sammy Guevara and Eddie Kingston had a little bit of an altercation, in relative terms much more minor than this, and Eddie Kingston was kind of quietly suspended for it. So you've already kind of set a precedent that you have to, at the bare minimum, do something about this. If any kind of fight, even if it didn't escalate as much as this report indicates, all the way into fighting people with chairs and causing that kind of issue. One of the reports also was that Ace Steel presumably bit Kenny Omega. So I don't know about that one, but again, like the point is that a lot of these reports lead to a lot of craziness, and a lot of folks are reporting, and a lot of these outlets are reporting that a lot of crazy things happen as a result of it. If even a fraction of that is true, even a small fraction of that is true, you find yourself in this situation where you got to do something about it. You can't just let CM Punk presumably get away with this. But at the same time, did the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega in the role? Remember, they're still EVPs technically. Being an EVP means a certain amount of responsibility. Did they, in turn, help escalate a situation where a lot of times, in more of a leadership role, they should be de-escalating a situation? And so there could be a little bit of blame to go around on both sides on this, but either way, now you're dealing with this very, very fragile situation where you don't want to lose Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks. You don't want to lose any of them. It's kind of important. And I will say that Fightful, in kind of their recap of it, Sean Ross Sapp made the correct point. If you have to choose between the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Hangman Page, obviously, who was one of the recipients of the verbal tongue lashing from CM Punk, if it's a discussion between losing one or more of that group or CM Punk, you have to kind of choose the multiple people who are going to be potentially around for years versus the star, yes, and the draw that you have that will only likely be around a couple more years. Because realistically, CM Punk is not at the beginning of his career, he's towards the tail end. He still has gas in the tank and he still has value, obviously, as a draw, but you can only deal with so much. So it's a situation where you really have to get to the bottom of who precipitated what, who's responsible for what, and who can actually operate professionally going forward, and where the least amount of damage you can do. You want to lose as few people as possible, because if even a fraction of this is correct, somebody's got to pay the price for this. It feels like Ace Steel will probably be the one in that situation. But if that happens again, where does that put the relationship between CM Punk and Tony Khan as opposed to the relationship between Tony Khan and the Elite? So there's a lot of moving parts to it. Really what it comes down to, and the reason why I wanted to do this last update here before Wednesday, is I wanted to get some thoughts out in relation to that. I'd be curious if any thoughts you might have. Obviously, in this situation, the more discussion is about what's going on presumably behind the scenes and the speculation and people wondering what's happening with it versus what's happening on screen. So I'm not sure anything on screen they could do. And this is why I said that, in my opinion, I really doubt very much that this is a big elaborate work by Tony Khan, because at this point we've gone past the point of world building and blurring the lines and all of this into full-fledged, like, it's almost no way to come out of this looking good. There is potentially a way to salvage some of it, but that's like your best case scenario. Your best case scenario is figuring out enough and maybe getting enough people on the same page to potentially build an angle out of this. But at the same time, it's like you got to be exceedingly careful. I would not want to be in Tony Khan's shoes trying to sort through this mess if, again, even a fraction of some of these reportings are true. And one other thing I'll mention as well, FTR, who have been very supportive of CM Punk, presumably from PW Insider. FTR had left the building, according to them. And at the same time, also, Chris Jericho did take on a bit of a leadership role towards the end of that scrum by kind of showing up when maybe he wasn't exactly scheduled to be there, and kind of helped kind of steady the waters a little bit there to try to give AEW a little bit of time to buy some time as far as when things were moving fluidly while Tony Khan was literally sitting there. And one other thing I'll mention, and kind of it alludes to the thumbnail that I used there. I decided to use the thumbnail that was related to the scrum because it just seems appropriate. It's almost the perfect image, though, if you really think about it. If you get a chance, take a look and find that image from the press conference, or watch the press conference yourself if you're really intrigued about it. One other thing I'll recommend to you if you want to check it out is that Jim Cornette, as part of his podcast, had a discussion on the whole AEW scrum and the things that Punk said. And Jim Cornette very much is in the camp. He's hashtag Team Punk on that one. He's not the biggest fan of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega at any time, or necessarily Tony Khan. So obviously he would side a little bit more with CM Punk's grievances. I do believe, maybe just to finish on this point, I do believe that CM Punk has some grievances. I do believe that the way that some of the things going backstage at AEW, a lot of us don't know about. But it would not surprise me if wrestlers who are very prone to being, and there's really no nice way of me saying this, emo. So you've got a guy in CM Punk who is historically emo, like he has a temper. He left WWE because he didn't like the situation that was going on. He didn't feel good. He had his own ailments. I think he had a staph infection, if memory serves me, and then the blow up with Colt Cabana. So like CM Punk has the kind of volatile temperament, where if something doesn't fit what he's trying to do, or things don't go exactly the way he wants them to, he will not hesitate to speak up on it. But the level of the blow up in the situation that it came as part of a media scrum in front of media, where he decided to air all his grievances. He had his own personal Festivus in that moment, with Tony Khan staring there with that look on his face that I put on the thumbnail there, of, horror and being forlorn, and almost 1,000-yard stare going on, like, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? If that's not legitimate, he's a hell of an actor. I got to give him credit for that. He's improved a lot since the days he was doing some promos with Impact, when they were doing the little Forbidden Door piece, which was entertaining, but Tony Khan is no thespian from the stuff that I've seen. And if that look is him acting, then he's certainly improved. I think it was more a look of abject horror, with the understanding of dread that he was about to have to deal with a situation that he doesn't know at the time necessarily what was going to happen next, but he knew something he was going to have to deal with was going to happen next. And basically, I will give Chris Jericho credit for kind of coming in and kind of calming the waters as far as the press conference was concerned and the media scrum. Even though in the end it didn't make a difference. A lot of people ended up having a lot of stories to come out of it, and a lot of speculation. And then obviously now the additional reporting only adds to that. One other thing I'll quickly say about it, since I didn't get a chance to really speak on it much, it was kind of interesting also in that same media scrum. That's why I wonder if they're going to keep doing the same media scrims going forward. You also had Tony Storm kind of making some interesting comments about Thunder Rosa. I think maybe after Dynamite, I'll probably spend a little time talking about that, because in relative terms it was much more minor comparatively, but it was interesting. There was a lot of these little things that I thought were very interesting with the way that show ended, and the post show, and kind of where we're sitting at. Regardless, though, I guess all eyes now go to Dynamite, and that's really where we're gonna have to see what, if any, kind of public reaction there is to any of this. We'll probably get more information as things go on coming forward. We'll see if there is a Being the Elite episode responding to it in some way, in kind of their usual style, maybe lampooning some of it. There's a lot of moving parts still, and I guess AEW does have people's attention now. Maybe not necessarily for the reasons they want to, but anyway, I wanted to get some more thoughts out on that. Like I said, this will be the last one I'll talk about related to this. I will probably try to have some thoughts out after Dynamite happens and we all get a chance to see. I'll be certainly watching, and I think a lot of other people will as well. Anyway, thanks very much for kind of listening to me rant on this piece a little bit and get through some other thoughts that I had. More videos to come, I think, in the coming weeks here, as I start to add this as kind of an element of the content going on in this channel going forward. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stuff coming. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.